Now, there was lots of discussion 2 years ago when the pandemic began that a lot of us were drinking more at home during lockdown. Well, teams at Glasgow University have carried out research suggesting lockdowns and restrictions throughout the year 2020 were linked to people drinking more indoors. They suggest there's been a shift in habits, and at home, people late night drinking and that sort of thing.
One charity has secured funding for a new role, a support worker tasked with befriending people in the community after they've been discharged from hospital, as the Nine Social Affairs correspondent Chris Clements has been finding out.
I would always sort of class myself as a heavy drinker. I always like to have one for the road, you know, and the drinking just progressed to morning drinking. I would drink in the morning, and then my husband would find bottles in the house. I would hide bottles. I would hide the fact that I was drunk. You know, I was a lot of thinking, oh, I'm drinking too much, but it'll be all right. It'll get better, or I'll cut down next week. You know, it was always like that.
But it didn't get better. From her early 40s, Amanda found herself dependent on drink. It ruined relationships, and finally, she found herself alone in her flat in Edinburgh.
I couldn't wait till 10 o'clock to get along to the shop, get my wine, sit here and drink it. And it was just back and forward to the shops, most days just on my own. And then obviously when I didn't have money or I couldn't have the drink, the withdrawals were just awful. I would have falls in the house, I would take seizures due to the withdrawals, ended up in hospital. It was awful, absolutely awful.
She was admitted to hospital on multiple occasions with alcohol-related illness. She was ping-ponging between the bottle and a hospital bed.
Well, for me, I felt, oh, here we go again. This is me back again. So I would stay in maybe sometimes for 2-3 days. They'd put me on some drips. They'd put me on diazepam to calm me down, withdraw me from the alcohol, and then I'd be discharged.
Into what?
Back to here.
And what would happen after that?
Well, it would just all start again. The drinking would start again. I mean, that was my fault, because I had nowhere else to turn. So I just come back here, and maybe for a couple of days I'd maybe be all right. But then it would just start again. I think, right, I'll just have a couple of drinks and then I'll be all right. But no, and it got worse and worse and worse every single time. My self-esteem was low. I had lost all my identity. You know, as a daughter, as a mother, I just felt like I didn't know who I was, to be honest. You know, it got to that stage, I thought, I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm just this alcoholic mess who ends up in the hospital, but comes back again and drinks and drinks.
Amanda finally broke the cycle of loneliness and alcohol addiction during lockdown and has been sober for 16 months. She now has a dog, is volunteering, and is attending college. She's been helped by a befriending service for people affected by alcohol addiction, run by the homeless charity Rowan Alba. Patients are referred there by Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary, but even with alcohol-related hospital admissions down, the charity still needs volunteers.
When they make a referral, we will go and visit the person in their own home when they've been discharged from hospital. Now, the time to approach that person would be ideally when they are in hospital, and so we've seen over the last few years the numbers of referrals we receive from the hospital increase, and unfortunately the length of time that it takes us to get to that person, often the window is closed, so they've returned home to the same lonely, isolated place that they were before. They go to the shop, they buy more alcohol, and the cycle starts again.
Because of that gap, Rowan Alba's been awarded £45,000 over 3 years from a neurological fund from the R.S. MacDonald Trust to hire a hospital link worker.
Good boy, okay.
It's a part-time position, now held by Michelle Wright. Her role is to visit people admitted to hospital with alcohol-related illness.
Good boy.
She then befriends them on the outside.
It means that when they come out, I can go straight to their home and meet them in their home, and there's not the whole referral gap that we have at the minute.
She herself has battled alcohol addiction, but has been sober for 5 years.
I think we just have a really outdated stereotype of what an alcoholic looks like. And it's really unhelpful that we have that stereotype, because that stops you getting help. And it stopped me for a long time, because I thought, well, you know, I still have my family and I still have my home and I still, you know, go out and see my friends and, you know, still do things. I'm still actively involved in my community. So do I have a problem? You know, I'm not homeless and I'm not sleeping rough. And
That was Chris Clements there with that report. Well, Dr Alistair McGilchrist is a consultant liver specialist with Alcohol Focus Scotland, and as you can see, he is live for us in our Edinburgh studio. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Alistair, coming in to the studio. The most recent figures we were seeing today, alcohol-related hospital admissions down 10%. Are we heading in the right direction with this?
It'd be nice to think so, wouldn't it? Actually, I'm with Scottish Health Action and Alcohol Problems, not Alcohol Focus Scotland, but two sister organisations.
Apologies for that, sorry.
No problem. I'd get around if I didn't mention that. But yes, on the face of it, the fall in admissions might be good news, but we've got to put that in the context that over roughly the same time period, 2020, we saw a big increase in alcohol deaths. And so that's obviously not good news. In the early months of the lockdown, there was a big fall in all hospital admissions, not just due to alcohol. People weren't going to hospital. Now, maybe that was because people were anxious about turning up in hospital. They thought they might catch COVID. Maybe it's because hospital resources were being redeployed elsewhere and it was harder to get access. And it's possible there's a slight link, if you like, between that reduced access to services and the increased harm. But I think that'll only be a small factor. The bigger picture here is that there are still thousands of admissions. We see about 100 admissions with alcohol problems to Scottish hospitals every day. And so a 10% fall, it's still far too many than it should be, and there's a great deal of harm going on.
Yeah, and we were hearing from Amanda in Chris Clements' report there just around the challenges, specifically around people who are drinking at home. It's masked, there's not so much judgment, it's cheaper of course as well. Is it really hard to quantify the number of folk who are drinking at home that's potentially developing into a problem?
Yes, well, yes and no. I mean, I think that there's been a number of surveys which have their own limitations of what's happened during lockdown, and including this just published yesterday, and they all point in the same direction. And it's kind of what you might expect, that clearly during lockdown, the pubs and the clubs and the restaurants were all closed, so there was no on sales, if you like, but we compensated for that by drinking more. And of course, off sales, what you're buying in the supermarket is much cheaper. You can get much more than if you're going to the pub. And there are no limits. If you're at home on your own, there's nobody there to call time. You can drink until all the drink is gone. Yeah. And of course, also during lockdown, big mental health problems with isolation and loneliness, people turn to drink. And alcohol itself is a depressant. It aggravates the mental health problems.
And Dr McGilchrist, we always seem to be talking about how Scotland has such a chronic problem with alcohol. Every year the same story seems to be emerging. Why do we think that is? Why has Scotland got such a big problem with booze?
Well, if I knew that. But I think it's important to keep it in perspective. You know, we always think, oh well, it's just the way we are in Scotland, there's nothing you can do about it. But actually, we drink far more in Scotland now than we did, you know, when I was starting out in my career, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. And that's largely related to its affordability. You know, we drink what we can afford, and that's not just in Scotland, that's elsewhere too. So I can't tell you why we Scots drink more than the English, but both in Scotland and England, we largely are drinking much more than we were a generation ago because it's far cheaper.